That better? Yes? No? Okay. So this is the Visual Basic Advanced Language and IDE feature session. My name is Stephen Lees.
I'm Amanda Silver.
I'm going to talk about some of the IDE features kind of for the first half. Amanda's going to come up a little bit later and talk about the language stuff. I guess I just have two questions for you for starters. One is, how many of you went and saw Jay and Shemez present kind of the intro to VB Whidbey session just a little while ago? Cool, awesome, maybe half of you. So the question I have for the other half of you is, how many of you are concerned that we're trying to kind of dumb down Visual Basic? Excellent, just a couple. Well, it's something I've just been hearing in the hallways a little bit. Somebody wrote a blog entry about the keynote this morning saying, boy, all this drag and drop stuff, it's really nice, but I really want to see some code. So there's really kind of two purposes to this session. One of them is just to show you a bunch of the new advanced features we have in Visual Basic, just kind of a yes, Virginia, they are in there. And the other point is really to give you a sense for our design philosophy. So what we're going to do is walk you through sort of a lot of the guts of some of these advanced features to give you a sense for how they're built, how they're part of the framework, part of Visual Basic, but then also show you how they plug into some of the things that make them really easy to use. So you can kind of have the best of both worlds. Let me start by switching over to our little sample app. We tried to construct a somewhat interesting application that would show off some of the IDE stuff as well as the language stuff, and we decided to go with the holiday gift-giving idea generator. Thank you. So the idea is you can type in something that maybe you're interested in, I don't know, for gift ideas. Albert Einstein, let's say, I'll choose books. And when I click go, I'm actually going off to the live Amazon Web Services that probably most of you saw in the keynote yesterday. It brings me back a bunch of hits. And I can just click on these, and then it shows me the picture. Got a little price there, tells me kind of what size it is, interesting things. And it's kind of fun to surf around. What's really interesting is that some people actually have entries in books and music. So, you go for Madonna. Got some nice kids' books here. Some not so nice kids' books, but And then, of course, if I switch over to music, then there's all kinds of other stuff there, too. So I encourage you, if you haven't, to take a look at the Amazon Web Services. They're really pretty cool to play with, and you can build some really impressive apps on top, as you saw yesterday. Let me go ahead and switch back over here for a sec. One of the things that, for instance, I might want to do with this application that I don't have set up right now is to allow myself to change the web service URL maybe after I've deployed the application. Another thing is that I could come in here in the enter your idea box, and I could make it a combo so that I could save maybe the last 5 searches that I did. And what you need to do for that is basically make sort of configuration settings for your application. So this is something that you can do today in VS 2002 and 2003. Excuse me. We have this app config file that contains settings. There's a simple framework class for reading them, and you can extend them. Let's just take a look at what that looks like if you haven't seen it lately. So here's just a really basic app settings. We've got the configuration block, the app settings tag, and then I've got a bunch of keys in there. And if I were to come in here, I could go ahead and write some code on the form. Create an app settings reader, and then I could just say dim is. Let's see if I have an integer setting here. How about get value? Oh, whatever. Default font size. So actually, of course, I have to C-type this thing or C-int it. So you can see it's gets the job done. One of the reasons why people typically want to extend these things is just because you kind of have to do some things that you would want to do. So we've put a lot of work into this in the framework in Whidbey, and there's almost too many things for me to really list on the slide here. But the settings class that I just showed you, that app settings reader, it's a reader. It doesn't do writing. So the new framework classes that we have in Whidbey support read and write. I also don't have to do the C type or the C int or the C whatever because we support strongly typed access now, which also means that you get IntelliSense for those, so the coding experience is really nice. Another thing that you have in VS right now is just that all of the settings are app scoped, and so we open that up so you can do app scoped or user scoped settings. And there's a bunch more stuff that we'll talk about in a sec. Let's just go ahead and dive into the way the classes look for this thing. So at the bottom, there's a settings-based class that just has the most basic knowledge of sort of how to keep a collection of settings, how to save them, and also how to use pluggable providers, and we'll get to that in just a sec. So that's a class in the framework. And then on top of that, there's an application settings-based class, and this adds a little more logic. What it knows how to do is look at somebody who inherits from it and examine attributes so that you can actually inherit from the app settings-based class and build up more functionality. And then finally, what you'd have to do, or of course what we're going to do for you in Visual Studio, is to inherit from that app settings base, create this Windows App 1 settings class. That's where you'd put in some attributes and things. And add a little more functionality. And then finally, on top of that, if you saw Jay's talk, if you saw the keynote this morning, you'll just be able to use the new my keyword in Visual Basic to get at these things. So if you had a default font setting, it's just my.settings.default font. Strongly typed, it's provider independent, it's got all that nice stuff just built in. So taking a look at the provider layer, there's an iProvider interface. And then since this functionality is shared across both client apps and web applications, there's sort of a family of providers for each side. So on the client side, we'll have a built-in provider for local settings that just stores them on your local hard drive. We're working on a provider for remote, and we'll probably maybe ship that as sort of a bit of sampleware for you to extend. And obviously, you can just customize it by plugging in any kind of provider that you want to. On the web side, they've got SQL access providers into the box, and again, you can do a custom provider of your own. So mention that stuff. Before we go here, let's just take a quick look at what the new app settings would look like. So I showed you the old stuff. Here's basically the format of a new file. We'll actually support the old app settings tag as well, so you can keep old settings in there if you want to. But we have a new application settings and a new user settings tab. So if I open this up, you can see this is roughly what the settings would look like. We tell you what the type is, the name, and you put in a value. And again, for application settings, it's typically things like web service URLs or database connection strings, that kind of stuff. Open up user settings, and again, you can see there's just two separate blocks. And you'll see why in a sec. So let me go back here. So the idea is basically we've got a bunch of different ways to plug into these things. You can write a custom provider. If you want to do something that isn't provided by the built-in functionality, you can extend that settings class if you're interested. But again, what we're trying to do is take that whole stack, that whole architecture that the framework provides, and make it really easy to get to. So we'll have a settings designer inside Visual Studio, and you'll be able to basically go in and pick a name for your setting, make it strongly typed, use your application scope, and give it a value. And the other thing you can do, we're certainly open to suggestions for this, but what you'll see up there is a profile, which we only use about maybe 10 other times in developer tools in different ways. But the idea is that you're really defining a schema when you define these settings. And what you might want to be able to do is just have different families of values for different purposes. Maybe to deploy to this server, you want one set of values. To deploy to another server, you want another. Maybe you're just playing around. We'll allow you to keep different sets and switch back and forth really easily. So there's a lot of cool stuff in there. As I mentioned, we have some special support for things like connection strings and web service proxies. So when you go and add a reference to a web service, we'll automatically put that proxy URL into config for you, so you just don't have to worry about it. It shows up in the designer. It's just there. Likewise for connection strings. Yes. So what happens when these things, when you create it in the development environment, you have the one file that I was showing you over here. So you've got this file. So I wanted to show you what happens when that actually gets deployed to an end user's machine. We'll basically take the app settings and keep those with your application. So it just turns into myapp.exe.config the way you're used to now. What happens with the user settings is that those get broken apart, and those are stored in the user's application directory. And then each user basically gets their own settings. That's something that the local settings provider just takes care of for you, so you don't have to worry about that. One aspect of this that you'll probably realize if you think about it for a sec is that because the app settings are staying with the application, typically that goes in the program files directory, and so if your user isn't running as an admin, then they can't actually change those, then your app can't change those settings. Typically that's not a bad thing because you probably only want an admin to change them anyway. Things like the URL, database connection string, you probably don't want your users mucking with. The user settings, those are stored in a folder in the application temp folder that the user actually has permissions to, so the application can change those. So let me see if I can show you sort of the coding experience. This is something we, quite honestly, don't have running yet, but I'll give you a sense for what it would look like. So I come here on a form, and instead of messing with the old settings, I can do something like dimf as font. I just say font equals my dot. Oops. Oh, sorry, in the wrong place. There's banana again. Let's make her go away. Okay. Okay. So I create my font variable, and I just say f equals my dot settings dot default font. There you go. So that's what the experience will be like. And again, it's really pretty straightforward. I think typically most of you are just going to come into Visual Studio. You'll take a look at the designer, pop some settings in, get them out really easily with my.settings. But again, if you want to, the power's totally there to customize at all those different levels of the framework. And we're building on top of those same pieces that you would use from any other environment. Let's get rid of that. Okay. Oh, one more thing I should mention. One of the bullets that I didn't mention at the bottom of that first slide was just that there's a model for validation events now. So I believe it's that app settings base class is the one that fires an event when you change a setting. So it's that bottom block of code there. I hope you can see it in the Mac. But basically, it fires an event. It tells you which setting is changing, and it gives you a chance to back out of that change if you want to do that. Okay. So kind of going inside out here. That was sort of a dive into the settings, and there's really a lot more there. I think some other people are talking about it. You could easily spend an hour just kind of walking through all the different aspects of that model. But I wanted to show you where that thing lives inside Visual Basic. So what we've done is we've put all of the features like settings, for instance, resources, some other things. Everything's just kind of one-stop shopping inside something we call the application designer. So this is a new designer. It sits kind of next to forms or code or whatever. And it's kind of a home base for all the things that you might want to customize in your application other than your code, basically. So one of the things that'll live here is resources. Or sorry, settings is what I meant to say. That's kind of a space for rent right now, but the UI that I showed you will be plugging into there. And then resources, I think if you saw Shemez talking, he talked about my.resources. And again, this is one of those cases where there's a bunch of architecture in the framework for dealing with resources. It plugs right into this designer. You get to it through my. It's really easy to use, but it's still very powerful. And then tomorrow at 10 a.m., Sean Drain is going to be telling you all about the deployment and publish tabs in this thing. But these let you take advantage of the no-touch deployment that Eric showed off in his keynote this morning. And there's just a bunch more stuff there, too. The other thing is that we'll be moving references out of the Solution Explorer and into this designer as well, both DLL references as well as web references. And so that's something we're interested to hear your feedback about and whether you like that. Did I get it right? I did. Finally, it is, as I mentioned, it's in a non-modal window. So it's got some of the things that used to be in project properties. And we found one of the advantages of making it non-modal is you can just leave that thing up, change them when you want to. You don't have to cancel out of it. It's just always available there. One thing I can't show you, but I think Shamez did a little bit of sample code for, or some demo code for, was a bunch of new events that are part of the application designer as well. So in the current version, we just didn't really have anywhere for these things to live. So a startup and a shutdown event, those are really very useful. But if we fire startup on a particular form, we don't necessarily know that it's going to be alive when your app's trying to finish off to shut down. So what we've done as part of the application designer is really give these kinds of app-wide events a place to live. So there's a scope that's alive as long as your application is alive. So we'll fire a startup event. You can do any kind of interesting processing you might want to do at the beginning of the application. Again, when your app ends, we'll fire a shutdown event. One of the cool ones is unhandle exception. I think you'll all find that very interesting. And I think Shamez may have covered this, but typically, let's say you do get an unhandle exception. What you might want to do, for instance, is write something to the Windows application log for your app. Say, hey, here's some data about what happened, help you debug the situation. And of course, there's going to be a my.application.log that makes that really easy. And needless to say, I hope, that's also built on a bunch of great extensible framework functionality. So for instance, if you want to use my.application.log to write to a file log instead of the Windows application log, that's really easy to do too. And then finally, sort of in this day of everybody toting their laptops around, it's probably really useful for your application to know when the network's been connected and disconnected. So we have events for that too. Okay. So that's the app designer, that's settings. Hopefully that gives you a sense for what I'm talking about in terms of providing sort of both the depth of features and the power features, as well as just making them really easy to get to. Let me talk a little bit more about the code snippets that Jay showed you. Close this down. Nope, didn't want to close that down. Let me come over here. Get the application back. Let's see who else has some interesting stuff. So you can tell this is live because sometimes there's little network delays. So one other thing that I didn't really think of adding to this application is drag and drop. I do actually have to go and manually type into the text box. Yes, it's true. But I'm a lazy person. I don't really want to have to do that. If I've already got a notepad somewhere, well, one of the things that I typically do is about every 3 to 4 weeks, what I want to do is implement drag and drop for an application. And 3 to 4 weeks is just enough time for me to kind of forget about exactly how to do drag and drop. So one of the things I did is I just wrote up a couple of code snippets that help me do that. So I can come in here. Let's pick text box 1. And the first thing, I can sort of remember I need to do something on drag enter. So I'll come in here, insert the snippet. I've got some drag and drop. I'll choose the drag enter event code, and boom, it's in there. I don't even need to customize it.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's what I like to hear. All right, so I know that I need to do a drag drop event too. So I'll come in here. Let's see. I'll bet I have another snippet that handles drag drop. Do you think? Okay. Yes, I do. It's actually got a control tag here highlighted. So if I was doing drag drop for a different control, a different text box, I could just type that in right now. It'll stay yellow, so I can tab around back in there. But actually, conveniently enough, this is text box 1. So let's fire that up. And I'll come over here to my drag source. Let's see. Here's one. That's a good gift idea. Drag that in there. Boom. drags, it drops. I can go off with a little bit of network delay again. And it'll find me some interesting Visual Basic books that make great gifts for the whole family. Really, they do. So, there we go. Ta-da. Wow. Okay. So let me show you a little bit more about that stuff. One of the things we really wanted people to do was to be able to write their own code snippets. And in fact, we'd like you all to go out right after this and write some code snippets. So we made a really simple format for writing these things. There's basically a header. And if you look in here, this is actually the schema that you have in the drop that you picked up yesterday in the version of Visual Basic. We're going to probably clean it up. I think we've decided to get rid of some of those fields. But basically, you'll have a title there. You'll have an author, a category, so that we can browse for these things and search for them. Just some basic information about who put this thing together. And the interesting stuff is kind of in here. So you get to specify in a tag what things your code snippet should reference. So a lot of times, you've probably all experienced this. You find a great code snippet, you copy it out of whatever web page or source it was in, you paste it into your application, and then you spend the next maybe 5 minutes trying to figure out, okay, I got to import this, and I got to reference this, and so you don't have to do that anymore. You can just create these code snippets. You just get to say what things it should reference, and then the editor automatically goes in and references those for you if they haven't already been added to your project. Yeah? All right. But wait, there's more. We do imports too, surprise. So we'll automatically import any stuff that you need to do. So again, it's all just to make the experience really good. You just pop that thing in. You really want to be able to hit F5 and have it run right away. And then finally, the last two kind of are the most important. I'll go bottom up. The code, there's actually a language tag in there. So we use the same schema for Visual Basic, for C# to do these things, although the experience in the C# editor is a little different, but they're all sort of the same under the covers. So inside the language, inside the code block, then you actually put your code in there. And what you need to do is mark up the things that you're going to decide to highlight as replacements, the way that I marked up that text box 1 to highlight it for replacement. And then up here, whoops, in the declaration section, you can enter stuff, information about that thing. It's got an ID. It's got a tooltip. And so that's kind of what's in there. It's really easy. If you take a look inside, if you install the Visual Studio CDs, you'll see some of these in there. Just search for .vb snippet files, and you'll take a look at them. But you don't even really have to do that. Well, actually, you will for now. But when we hit beta, you won't have to do that. Because what you can do is come in here. I'll take the music request, for example. So what I might want to do is take this whole thing, and maybe I just want to remember how to write code against the Amazon Web Service. So I can select the whole thing. I go in here. I say create snippet. Whoops. All right, then. Let me select this whole thing. Life is unfair. Let's try this side. Not quite as exciting, but there we go. So you can select any code you want, as you've seen. Really. And turn it into a snippet. And we've got this nice editor here. So that thing on top that you see, it's actually a VB editor code window. So you get syntax highlighting, you get the squiggles, and then down in the bottom half, you basically define all those properties that I showed you that show up in the schema. So we're trying to make that very easy to do. And as I said at the bottom here, sharing is encouraged. So we really want to see people creating a lot of these things. We think it'll be great for getting people to learn Whidbey. I know Eric was talking about getting more samples out there, and we think this is just absolutely a fantastic way to produce those. The other thing that's really interesting about it is that for so long we've really thought of code reuse in terms of objects and classes, and that's certainly very powerful. That's good at a certain level. But this is sort of in a smaller scale, this is a great way to reuse code because you don't have to package something up as a class, library, an object, or whatever. You can just still create one of these things, but it's very easy, and chances are very good somebody can run your code right away. One more thing that I can't demo, but I just wanted to mention to you, there's sort of a family of features that we think of in terms of refactoring your code. And so we're working on some of those features too. We're sort of kind of getting to that point where we have to stop adding new stuff to the product, but we're hoping to sneak this one in. So for sure, we're going to have a way to rename something we call a symbol. The idea is instead of just doing text find and replace, so you want to find all the instances of text box 1, which is going to go find it in comments and maybe in different forms that you didn't even really care about. What you can do is highlight something like text box 1, and you say, I want to rename this thing, this object. And the compiler is actually going to kick in, since we're always compiling your code in the background anyway. And it's going to say, oh, you mean this one on this form in this scope, and it just renames just those symbols for you. So it's a very targeted way. It's much more precise than doing text search and replace. Doesn't affect stuff like comments. And then we're hoping to get some other refactoring features in there. For instance, I'd be able to highlight that block of code inside, let's say, the Amazon make request function and just do a create method, which would then, it would analyze the code, figure out if I need any parameters, and basically turn that into a sub or a function for me. So that's something else. If you're interested, definitely come up and let us know. A lot of us will be able to ask the experts tonight. That's a great chance to kind of. Sorry?
Why won't it affect comments?
The symbolic rename, the rename symbol doesn't affect comments because it's just looking for that actual symbol in your code. So before I turn it over to Amanda, I just wanted to run you through really quickly some of the things we're doing to improve asynchronous calling. And as you probably noticed, that application could really use them. So one of the things I did actually already do was hook up the picture box on this form so that this thing is actually loading asynchronously. In the current versions of Visual Studio, we have this async calling convention that uses iasync result and the begin and end methods, and that really works pretty well. We just took a look at that and we thought, I bet we could make this even a little smoother. And we looked at the event model, because when you think about it, the Windows event model, it really is an asynchronous mechanism. All these things are happening outside your app, but you just see a sort of a linear stream of events that are fired to you. And so what we've done, for instance, is the way that application works is that when I click on a list box so that the selection changes, I want to load in the picture for that item. And let me show you what that code looks like. Let's see. There we go. So first of all, I'll actually come in here and just dispose the original image. I'm going to hide the picture box, show the progress bar. And this is really where the interesting stuff happens. I'm going to call the new load async method on the picture box. And then I'm going to give it the information about information about the currently selected item, and it's going to go off and load the picture for me. So this action right here in the selected indexed change event, this is happening on the main thread of my form. What load async does is it kicks off a background task that happens on a background thread. So it's actually dealing with marshaling the data that I pass in to the background thread so it can take care of that. And then when that background thread is done, it's going to marshal that stuff back to the main thread. And what happens is it calls this picture box load completed event, which is right here. So at this point, I'm back on the main thread, and I can start calling stuff on my form to do things on the form without having to worry about marshaling those calls or worrying that I'm messing up my form data because I don't have to worry about thread synchronization. So it's kind of a nice, clean mechanism for, again, making it easier to write some good code. But wait, there is more. if you noticed, some of those times when I was changing things, I got a little progress bar going there. So the other thing that this mechanism does, and it's sort of built into the model, is that it fires progress change events. So if I sync the load progress changed, now I can update the progress bar, and that's also very nice to do. Finally, it's not just the, there we go. Actually, you know what? I'll just start a clean one for this. It's not just the picture box. This is something that we're going to bake into web service proxies as well. So when you want to call a web service synchronously, and as you can see from that example, it's not a bad thing to do, it'll also be just baked into those web service proxies. So you'll have the new model there. And on top of that, there's actually just a general component that you can put onto your forms. It's over here on the toolbox in the component section. It's called background worker. So if I drag that, if you look down on the bottom of the screen, it shows up on the tray. And that basically implements the same model that you saw in the picture box that we'll have on the web service proxies, just in a generic way, so that anything can really do asynchronous work. And it follows the same basic model. You kick it off on the main thread, let's say in response to a button being clicked. It fires a do work event, and that happens on the background thread. And in the event args, you'll actually get the data. So if you want to pass it in, you can call, I think it's the run worker async method. And that just calls it in. In fact, got it right here. So I mentioned that stuff. You can just call that run worker async method. There it is in the button click event. So you can take a look at that on the slides and see how that works. And then that calls the do work, which happens on a background thread. And then again, when it's completed, it'll call the run worker completed event on your foreground thread. And again, the system is handling, marshaling the data back and forth for you, so you just don't have to worry about that stuff. And the other thing that I wanted to sneak in there is that the whole model supports cancellation as well as progress. And the background worker task, the component deals with those things too. So if you want to enable it for progress, you can report progress. If you want to enable it to support cancellation, then you can just stop in the middle and say, I'm done. I think we did the demo already. So that's my piece. I'm going to let Amanda come up and tell you about the language features. Thanks very much.
Can you hear me? All right? Okay, great. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go through a really quick, oops, wrong one. A really quick language tour, kind of a sprint, through a whole bunch of small language features that we added. I am not on. Which one is the A?
C.
C. Okay. So I'm just going to, one of the things that we heard is that you guys really missed properties with different accessibility. So we added that back. I can have a class, foo, and it has a public property name, and its type is string. And I can make the setter private on this. I can restrict the accessibility of the setter. I can actually do it for either the getter or the setter, but it's more common to have a private setter than a private getter. Another thing we heard is you guys want it. Sometimes your loop logic just gets a little hairy, and you want to get out of it somehow. So if I have a for loop here, and I have a nested while loop, I'm just going to do kind of dummy things here. And then I have some logic in here that, I have a select case, etc., whatever. Just a whole bunch of stuff in there. I can continue to the next iteration of the loop. And I can continue to either the for or the while loop from within here. Additionally, we also added in things like is not, so that your your logic just reads a little bit better. We also added in unsigned integers. So I can create a variable here that's an unsigned integer, and I can create arrays. I can pass it to things. It's generally good for interop, and also there are some situations where it will actually improve your memory because you need that certain range of values above the signed, and you need that extra bit. Additionally, not only do we just have friendly names here, it's not just about friendly names, it's about the fact that unsigned integers will now factor into overload resolution. So earlier when you used unsigned int 16 in your application, the Visual Basic compiler wouldn't factor that into the overload resolution. It would just treat it like another type. It wouldn't treat it like an intrinsic type. So now it's an intrinsic type. Additionally, it'll work for late binding. It's just plumbed in all the way through and through. We also recognize that sometimes the array bounds are a little bit confusing. So we added the ability to make that explicit. Now the lower bound still has to be 0. But at least it's explicit and it's easier to read, and you know that that's the inclusive right there, that there are 11 elements there. What else do we have? So I'm just going to going to insert snippet. One of the really cool things about this snippet mechanism is that the editor recognizes the context that you're in when you're trying to spit something. So the items that are grayed out there are not appropriate in this context. They might be appropriate if I was within a method, but they're not appropriate if I'm at the global level. So here I'm just going to create a dummy class that implements the iDisposable pattern and dispose, just so that I can show you that we now have the using statement, so that I can basically when the as new. This is another thing. We also have a little bit of control flow analysis in the compiler, so that we basically follow your variable as you code, and we'll let you know if you try to access an instance member before you've actually assigned to it. So basically, the using statement, when you exit the block of the using statement, it will cast that object to the iDisposable interface and call dispose for you. It's a little bit easier to read. You usually do it with try, catch, finally statements now, but it's just plumbed in now. So, I guess, is that it? Let's see. There we are. Oh, the other thing we have is partial types, and this is something that that you're able to, well, basically, this will take the generated code and put it into another file so that you don't have that region there. But there are a lot of uses for it. So you could, for example, take your interface implementation for some giant interface and put it in another file, and then have another file that's kind of your main class implementation, and you can add the two classes together. So I can have partial class Mary here, and I can have another class Mary here, and they'll be added together. So that if I have Wilma there, and Bob, if I dim up an instance of Mary, it shows both Bob and Wilma because those classes have been added together. So I can do it across multiple files. It's an easier way to kind of factor your code so that it's easy to read, easy to navigate. let's see. So I'm just going to delete all this so that we can go back to the main application. And one of the things that I thought would be neat to add to this application is something so that I can basically take the size of all of the things that I'd like to purchase, because that's something that the web service gives back to me. And if I have a number of things that I'm adding to my shopping cart that I intend to purchase and package into the same present, I can figure out what size box I need to get. So basically, the web service, which is being slow right now, comes back for every one of these items with the size of the book. And if I decide to purchase it, well, the required size of the box should exceed that size. If I decide to purchase that one as well, I'm going to add together the sizes, probably finding the minimum volume and just do that right in there. But one of the things that we really wanted to focus on in this version is making sure that Visual Basic is a good language for component development. And something that we heard from a lot of people is that operator overloading is a necessary part of component development. So in this example, I have a type that represents the English measurement, basically feet and inches, and the inches I'm going to only hold to the decimal value. In here, I can define an operator to act on the type English measurement. And I wrote this class so that it can be reused, so that I can package it up into a DLL and I can use it in all of my applications. So my consumers of this type English measurement don't have to call an add function or call even the op_addition method, which is basically how operators are represented in metadata. I can just use plus. I mean, an English measurement is basically a numeric type. Why shouldn't I be able to use plus? And so the way that you do that is basically all operators are shared, and plus, like minus and less than and greater than, are something called a binary operator, which means that they have two sides to them. They take something on one side, something on the other side, and they perform an action. And so this right here, I take two parameters, and those basically are the operators. That means that the thing that happens on this side and the thing that happens on this side have to be an English measurement in this case. Now, it's not the case that both of them need to be the same. I could, for example, define the multiplication operator and have one side be English measurement and another side be integer. One of them has to be the type that I'm defining it on, though. And then in this case, they always return a value. So it's just going to take the English measurement and return an English measurement. There are some operators that need that require both of the operators to be defined. So, for example, less than requires that greater than is also defined on that type. Additionally, you can now define conversions in Visual Basic, so that if I want to take a string and assign it to an English measurement, I don't need to call a function to do that. So this is just another operator. It's a conversion operator, C-type, and you guys are all familiar with that. I'm just defining what it looks like to take an English measurement and convert it into a string. So I can do that with all types of intrinsics. I can do it between user-defined types and other user-defined types. The term narrowing, this could be widening, for example. This could be either narrowing or widening, but it basically describes the type of conversion that's taking place. It basically describes, is there data loss or not? A narrowing conversion means that there might be data loss, and so you only want to do this when you really know what you're doing. A widening conversion means that there absolutely isn't data loss, and there's no chance of any exceptions being thrown. So it's completely safe to do this whenever you want. You're not going to lose anything. Let's see. So what I did here is I made an English measurement type, and then I made a dimension type, and this has, three. Basically, this is the volume of, not the volume, the 3 dimensions of the book. So this contains 3 English measurements in this case. And then I defined the plus operator on it so that I can take 2 dimensions, add them together, and figure out, well, what does the next size need to be? I did this in kind of a, dummy implementation in this case, but it's just to show off the functionality. So then in my form designer, in my code at the bottom, I'm going to handle the button buy click, and I'm going to add it to my shopping cart, and then I'm going to add it together. So box volume is a dimension, and the thing that I'm getting out of the web service is also a dimension. Actually, what I'm doing here is I'm taking the string that Amazon returns to me, and I'm going to convert that into a dimension using the operator that I defined, the C type that I defined. And then I'm going to use the plus operator that I had defined on dimension as well, and it's all just going to happen. I can just treat them like they're numeric types. I don't have to think about, wow, this is another user-defined type, and I wonder what they named add this time. So additionally, another thing we heard is that you guys don't want the .NET platform, you don't want the ceiling to be put back on. Am I right? Yes. So generics is another thing that's going to be coming to the platform, to the .NET platform. And they're actually a very, very useful thing for not only component development, but also your end consumer application. Because it means that you have strongly typed collections. In this case, I defined a new collection of the type that the web service is returning to me. And when I get things out of the collection, I don't need to cast them at all. Let's go into into another file here and just try to let's look at the old way of using collections when they're loosely typed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create some dummy classes. And I'm going to dim up a new collection. And I'm going to add 10. And I'm going to define an integer. And I'm just going to take it right back out of the collection. Now, I get a squiggle. Why? Because with option strict on, I need to cast it to an integer because it doesn't know that it's an integer. So I'm going to do that here. Say, yes, this really is an integer. I just stuffed it in a few lines ago. And if we look at the ILDASM for this, let's build this first. We can see that there is a lot going on under the covers. Well, a little bit in this case, but it's still a lot. We're doing a conversion. Now, something that I want you to be aware of while you're looking at this, looking at ILDASM does not directly correlate to longer execution time because they're in debug configurations. There are certain IL that we don't spit and release mode. Also, integer overflow checking can add some IL. But basically, there's some conversions going on in this case. Now, if I were to change this, and I were to change this to be a collection of integer, I no longer need to cast this when I get it back out. And if I tried to stuff in 10 in this case as a string, it's going to tell me at compile time that that is not an okay thing to do, that this type, that this collection only holds integers, and that's the appropriate way to use it. So if we look at the IL again for this, let's just make the solution again. You're going to see that there's a whole lot less code. And in this case, less code really does correspond to faster execution time. So, now, just to show you that generics are not just an add-on, they're not just a checkbox in the Visual Basic Language, I want to show you some of the UI features that we've added to make it really, really easy to use and define. So I'm going to create a new class, a container list. And I'm going to define, and I'm going to say that it takes one parameter. So basically, it's a parameterized type, right? This class right here is complete. Its whole type description is complete when I say what T is. And so I can create a new add function here that accepts T. And what happens is when I pass in the type argument for what T should be when I instantiate it, like I did right here, when I said that the type argument in this case should be integer, it will replace this with integer. It will expect integer. And similarly, if I add, item, I as integer in this case, because I'm doing it on an index, I can return T, not if it's a function. And that will be replaced. So let's see. Additionally, if I create a new string that's supposed to act like a string, and I would probably in this case want to define all of the string operators on it, like ampersand and the like operator. You guys can overload the like operator. I think that's kind of cool. I can implement, I would probably want to implement implements, I did this earlier, comparer of string. And when I do that, it spits this and it replaces T right there with string. So it is implementing iComparer of string. It's implementing iComparer of T, but it's doing only the string-specific version of it. And I could actually, if I decided to change this instead to be a generic type for some reason, I could implement it generically, and it would just spit in T in that case, and that would be replaced. Let's see. Oh, so what I did in the case of the application that we're building is I created this strongly typed collection, and let's see. And I added the Amazon details of the, product to the collection class. And in this case, I did have to do a cast because listbox still only has an internal implementation that's object-based. But in this right here, I don't need to do any cast to get the dimensions function off of it. It's already there because it's known when I get it out of the collection that that's a dimension type. I didn't have to do any casting there.
Are we going to see a generic list box?
Generic list box. It wouldn't be that hard to define for yourself, but so one more thing that we, oops, okay. So I'm just going to jump through a whole bunch of, we went through all these. Let's see if I can jump ahead. So we went through generics. Basically, it offers compile time checking, which eliminates runtime errors. It improves performance because there's no casting and there's no boxing overhead. And it's also easy code reuse because I only need to have one collection type that can be used for a variety of different uses. Additionally, there will be a number of generic classes, generic data structures, basically, that will be offered in the base class library. So in the system.collections.generic namespace, there will be a dictionary and a collection, a list, a queue, a stack, a hash table, etc. And those data structures will be there for you to use really easily. There will also be a number of, I don't know how to term this, kind of design pattern classes, things like event handler of T, so that you don't have to create your own event handler delegate type every time you want to create an event. So that will just take the arguments that it expects and work fine. There will also be a type called nullable of T that will be a kind of a wrapper type that will represent, so for example, if I created a nullable integer, that would represent an integer that could be the entire range of integer, but also be null. So another thing that I think you guys saw earlier, and I talked about a little bit, we'll be doing a lot of control flow analysis. Basically, we're going to do this whole other level of analysis in the compiler that will analyze your code and let you know at compile time if we can see any errors or potential errors. So one of them that you saw earlier is the use of a variable before it's been assigned to, which could cause a null reference error. We'll also let you know if there are overlapping catch blocks or case statements, if you do recursive property or operator access, if you have an import statement that's been unused, that one doesn't really make a difference because it's purely a compile time construct, but it's interesting. If you have a local variable that's unused, you don't access. If there's a function or an operator that doesn't have a return value, we'll let you know. Additionally, something that we heard is that option strict you guys think is too encompassing. I know that in my programming, I only like to use late binding in very specific cases, but I really like Visual Basic's conversion mechanisms because I don't want to have to think about how to take a char and char whatever and convert it to a string. So we've broken out option strict, and you'll be able to granularly say, I want late binding to be turned, I want checking for late binding to be turned on, and I want it to be expressed as an error. I want conversions to be on, but I want it to be expressed as a warning, et cetera, et cetera. So that will all be broken out, and you guys will be able to pick and choose what you think is useful. So luckily, I guess we're right on time. And there are some other sessions that you guys should attend. Advanced debugging techniques that will be going on today. Habib will be doing it. And deploying applications using Click Once. Click Once it's probably one of the most important features that will be coming out in this next version. So definitely attend that talk. And then Whidbey CLR internals will cover a lot of the generics portion of what I was talking about. So you should definitely attend that if you're interested in generic classes and types. There's also an Ask the Experts tonight where I will be and where Paul Vick will be, who is the tech lead on the Visual Basic language, and he's standing in the back there, waving his hand. And he'll also be at the languages panel on Thursday, where we talk about the future of .NET languages and what's going to happen. And that'll be basically open question and answer format. We'd love to hear feedback, and also Paul, every once in a while, posts some really interesting information on panopticon.net. That's his web blog, so you should definitely check that out as well. And to summarize, we just wanted to drive home the point that the next version of Visual Basic is going to be really easy to use. It's going to be great. But at the same time, it's built on an extremely solid foundation. And there's been no ceiling put back on. There are a lot of points of extensibility, so that's good for your enterprise scale applications. And there are a number of powerful new language features and a number of ones that you know, we keep hearing from you guys that you just like to see, and they're really easy and nice to do. So please be sure to fill out the evaluation. And we now have questions and answers. And so I'm going to open the floor. Thanks.
Anyone wants to answer, ask a question, could you please use the aisle mic?
Nobody has questions?
Quick question regarding the click.
Hi. I missed the first minute, so I hope. Maybe you said this, but is there going to be built-in self-commenting?
XML.comments?
Yes.
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 That will generate a help file that goes along with the project?
Yes. Do you,
Go for it.
Again, can I ask you to use the aisle mic because we are recording the session and your questions are important. We want the recorded question.
So the syntax for constraints has changed somewhat since the PDC bits that you just got. So it used to be that I would say that this type has to be I-comparable and it has to be I-enumerable. But we got some feedback that they didn't like that you guys weren't very fond of that. So now we kind of use the curly braces kind of like set notation. So
Next.
Yes. Is there going to be a service pack for Visual Studio 2003?
So the question was, is there going to be a service pack for Visual Studio 2003? I don't know the precise answer to that question, but sooner or later I'd expect there would be one. If you have particular questions about what might be missing, just come up and grab us afterwards. We can try to answer those for you.
When you added some of the features like the unsigned and whatnot, a lot of those features weren't in the CLI. And
the CLS.
Correct, I'm sorry. So, and there used to be a kind of a close correlation between what was CLS and what was VB. And now that border is kind of moving forward, does that mean the CLS is changing too? Or does it mean that those will be non-compliant and will be flagged accordingly?
So there are a lot of answers. There are a lot of that's a complex question, basically. Both the CLS Okay, there are two things kind of. The CLS will be updated, but it will still only be updated to include things that are appropriate to include in the CLS. And we have lots of languages that are built on top of .NET. And unsigned types, for example, are not something that all languages want to support. So putting that in is not an option for the CLS. At the same time, we will have CLS compliance checking in this next version. So the compiler will, if for some reason you think CLS compliance is important to you because you expect to be consumed from all languages, then you'll be notified. So.
I mentioned that just because there seems to be a real close correlation in the previous version
Yeah.
between CLS and PDC.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay.
Hey, I was curious. Is there a way to browse the GAT and sort of reference something you've let out here now?
So, I'd like to know. Well, basically that's a very complex question, and I think we should take that one offline.
We will.
Okay. Thanks.
I'm still struggling to see whether we can implement the min and the max function for a variety of achieving the generic system. Yes or no?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
We are struggling to write our own min and max function for integers, that type of thing. And I'm not sure if the new generic simple function let us do it.
Oh yes. So another thing that we're going to have that we have in the bits that you guys got are generic functions. So instead of parameterizing a type itself, a structure, a class, and an interface, I can also parameterize a function itself. So I could define sort on an array of integers and have that be strongly typed to whatever kind of array I want to pass in. So yes, you will be able to define min and max value functions. And the return type can be the type that you parameterized it to be. Yep. What was his question? Oh.
When you prep the implicit, the narrowing operator,
Yep.
how do you do that if you wanted to have more than one return type? I noticed you had one for a string. Can I have one that's as double?
Yeah, you can overload that. So that's the one example. So basically the question is, can I define multiple conversion operators that differ only by the return type? Because today the general rule is that you can't do any overloading where the signature only differs by the return type. And this is the one example, this is the one kind of exception to that rule. And that's just because of the way that they're internally represented in the metadata, that's acceptable. So.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much.
Great job.